It's great to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much for having me. We are in unprecedented times where we are simultaneously facing environmental tipping points as a result of climate change, as well as economic tipping points as a result from our efforts to address climate change. The goal of this session today is really to provide you with information and context in order to empower you as investment decision makers to navigate these challenging times. Colonialism and Eurocentric ways of thinking really is what got us into our current climate crisis, and it can't be the same worldview that we use to get us out of it. Intergenerational Indigenous knowledge needs to be at the center of our collective climate action. Indigenous communities have been observing their ancestral lands for thousands of years and have also been sounding the alarm on the impacts of unbridled industrialism well before Western scientists ever did. Indigenous peoples are often the first and also the most heavily impacted by climate change, but are also uniquely positioned to address the challenges that come with it. Inuit knowledge, for example, is widely recognized to hold key insights into the changing climate of the northern coastline and documenting the associated impacts. This graph shows the annual temperature increases from when we began recording global temperatures in 1850 to 2024 from 6 different international data sets. As you can see, the evidence is pretty clear that temperatures are increasing pretty dramatically. It's interesting to note that actually oil and gas companies made their own internal predictions about global warming well before this was widely known information. This is a graph that was produced by ExxonMobil in the early 1980s, showing their own internal predictions on how greenhouse gas emissions would increase global temperatures over time. And their predictions have proven to be remarkably accurate. As you can see, that curved line there lines up pretty closely the ones that we saw on the previous graph. So we've established that the Earth's temperatures are increasing and that greenhouse gas emissions are largely to blame. But what does that actually mean? I find that sometimes that when we talk about climate change, we can get bogged down in the data and neglect to focus the conversation on how this is actually impacting human beings, the natural environment, and the resources that we need to sustain life here on Earth. So as levels of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases rise, they create an insulating effect, trapping heat and causing the planet to warm. And as a result, both the atmosphere and ocean temperatures increase, and this warming influences the water cycle, alters weather patterns, and leads to the melting of land ice, all of which can contribute to more severe and extreme weather events. I wanted to show this image because I think it does a good job at giving us sort of a bird's eye view of some of the most significant physical impacts that climate change had on our planet last year. Many of you have probably already heard this. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and the past 10 consecutive years have been the 10 hottest years on record. With rising temperatures more and more, we're seeing the direct impacts of climate change on our planet through increased frequency of extreme weather events. And according to World Weather Attribution, extreme weather reached dangerous new heights last year, contributing to the deaths of thousands and displacing millions of people. From February 2024 was the 11th consecutive month where global ocean surface temperatures hit a record high, fueling incredibly destructive storms. North America alone last year was hit by 16 hurricanes, with Hurricane Helen being the deadliest since Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The Amazon rainforest was also hit really hard by climate change last year, with droughts and wildfires taking out major swaths of land. Can I get a quick show of hands? How many people in this room today know someone personally who's been displaced by either wildfires or flooding? Yeah, a lot of people in the room. There are countless examples of how extreme weather has impacted indigenous communities over the past 5 to 10 years. The Kashechewan First Nation in Northern Ontario has experienced over a dozen years of displacement due to the yearly flooding of the Albany River. In Manitoba, many members of the Peguis First Nation still can't return home after the historic floods of 2022. The Lytton First Nation and its surrounding communities are still rebuilding to this day after the devastating 2023 summer wildfires. I am certain that folks in this room can think of many other examples of how extreme weather has impacted their communities. Severe flooding and devastating wildfires have now become a regular occurrence here in Canada, and these extreme weather events, which are disproportionately impacting Indigenous communities. This graph from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center shows that over 30,000 Indigenous people were displaced from their homes in 2023 alone. 42% of wildfire evacuations in Canada have been from communities whose populations are majority Indigenous identifying. So how does this apply to your context as investment decision makers? Well, these extreme weather events that scientists now predict will only increase in frequency and severity are already having negative financial impacts. Flooding and wildfires have serious economic consequences, disrupting supply chains and halting production for entire economic sectors, the forest sector being a major example. The costs of wildfires have exceeded $1 billion for 6 of the last 10 years, and over the past decade, floods have averaged nearly $800 million in insured damages annually. Extreme weather events are becoming so frequent and severe that many insurance providers are hiking their premiums and in some cases are actually refusing to provide coverage in areas that they now deem to have high levels of climate risk. Insurers estimate that for every dollar in insured losses from flooding, for example, there are $2 in uninsured damages that are borne directly by households and taxpayers. But physical impacts and insurance concerns aren't the only risks that investors face when it comes to climate change. We know that greenhouse gases are largely responsible for climate change, so the natural common sense solution, which many of the highest emitting countries have now committed to, is to transition away from our reliance on fossil fuel-based energy sources. We've made incredible strides over the past few decades in the development of renewable energy technology. Solar, wind, tidal, geothermal, just to name a few examples, have all become much more efficient and accessible and, more importantly, cheap to produce. In 1975, the first solar panels cost about $115 per watt. Fast forward to 2010, that price dropped to about $2 per watt, and today estimates are around 70 cents per watt. Ironically, solar and wind have become so much cheaper that many oil and gas companies are actually using renewable energy to power their operations. Exxon, Equinor, and Pink Petroleum are just 3 examples of oil and gas companies who are conducting drilling operations powered fully by wind and solar energy. In 2024, record amounts of clean power capacity was installed, and a record number of electrical vehicle sales were made. It is inevitable that in the not-so-distant future, due to policy decisions, prices continuing to decrease, and consumer and corporate uptake in these technologies, that green energy will be our primary source of power. That's great news for our planet, but also creates some serious challenges for investors in holdings in fossil fuel-reliant assets. As we transition our economy, those assets will become stranded assets on the corporate balance sheet as they literally become stranded in the ground. Assets that are deemed outdated, excessively polluting, or at risk from the physical impacts of climate change may face unexpected or early write-downs, devaluations, or even be reclassified as liabilities. According to Carbon Tracker, the fossil fuel value chain, including gas pipelines, engineering facilities, and warehouses primarily used for storage, represent an estimated $30 trillion in real assets. The global closure of coal mines is a good example of the potential impacts of stranded assets. With declining demand, many coal producers faced serious financial impacts over the past 20 years. For example, Black Jewel in the United States filed for bankruptcy and was liquidated in 2019, which left thousands of employees without jobs or benefits and left the financial burden on the taxpayers. According to the Global Energy Monitor, the coal industry could shed another 1 million jobs in the next 25 years. But it's not just assets in the fossil fuel value chain that might be at risk. According to a recent study done by the University of Exeter, the global economy could be exposed to up to $557 trillion in stranded assets by 2050 if fossil fuel investment continues. That's representative of 37% of global capital. There are, however, also huge opportunities that come with the green energy transition, and in many ways, Indigenous communities are at the forefront of this paradigm shift. According to the organization Indigenous Clean Energy, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit entities are partners or beneficiaries of almost 20% of Canada's electricity generating infrastructure, and almost all of that infrastructure is producing renewable energy. Renewable energy projects are bringing jobs and economic prosperity to Indigenous nations across Canada, while simultaneously improving environmental sustainability and also significantly reducing the reliance on expensive fuels like diesel. I wanted to just highlight a few examples today. The Cowessess Renewable Energy Storage Facility is a solar and wind project that was created by the Cowessess First Nation in collaboration with the Saskatchewan Research Council. It generates enough electricity to power 340 homes, and the provincial utility has a 20-year contract to purchase electricity from the facility, directly benefiting the nation, with the profits fully going to the Cowessess First Nation. The project also supports Indigenous businesses and provides training and employment opportunities for members of the nation to help maintain its operations, further contributing to the nation's economic development. The Pic-Mobert First Nation owns half of the Gitchki-Animki hydroelectric project in White River, Ontario. The nation, in partnership with Regional Power Incorporated, also operates 2 generating stations, each with a capacity of 18.9 megawatts. And since 2016, the project has been generating revenue for the community and supplying power to the Ontario provincial grid. And just last year, the Alkachko First Nation here in BC began the development of the largest off-grid solar power farm in Canada. The project is 100% owned by the nation and is expected to replace 1.1 million liters of diesel annually, which would reduce their reliance on diesel by approximately 64%. So with all of this, what can you do as fiduciaries? Well, ultimately, your responsibility as trustees is to educate yourselves on the risks and opportunities associated with climate change, look at how these show up in your portfolio, and then make a judgment call on what is most important to the needs of your portfolios and communities. So what tools do you have at your disposal? Well, Zai broke down a large amount of potential strategies that an investor might take, and all those tools apply to climate action. Some investors will choose to exclude investment from high-emitting sectors or companies. Others will focus on corporate engagement, policy advocacy, or proxy voting. Some investors are going to use all of those strategies. At the end of the day, it really boils down to the specific context of the individual investor. Today, I wanted to focus on just a few examples of some low-hanging fruit next steps that you might consider exploring when beginning to address climate change risks and opportunities. So Zai spoke a bit about investment beliefs. They're a really good place to start when you're looking to embed responsible investment considerations into your overall decision-making approach. Establishing formal investment beliefs really can be a great way to sort of set the foundation for all investment activity. And it also acts as a powerful communication tool when engaging with external investment managers. We've heard about the First Peoples Cultural Foundation a few times today. I believe there's a sheet on most people's tables that has all of their investment beliefs. I just wanted to highlight a few of them that are specifically focused around how they're thinking about the environment in climate change. So the foundation believes it has a responsibility to invest in a manner that respects all living and non-living relatives, including taking care of and preserving the natural world and leaving a healthy environment with sustainable ecosystems for future generations. The foundation will seek opportunities to invest in companies and industries that make positive contributions to society and the environment, including investments that value Indigenous leadership and respect Indigenous communities and cultures. And lastly, the foundation believes that environmental, social, and corporate governance factors have a material impact on the companies in which it invests and should be considered as part of the investment process to improve investment outcomes from a risk-return perspective over the long term. So these beliefs really make it clear to investment managers and external service providers that the First Peoples Cultural Foundation sees the health and sustainability of the environment and its ecosystems as a priority, expects that environmental factors are considered in the overall investment decision-making process, and not only do they want to mitigate environmental risks, they also want to be a part of the solution through investing in entities that contribute to positive outcomes for the environment. However, the question still remains, how do you actually make sure that your investment managers are doing the work? So as Zai mentioned, it's important to understand your investment manager's efforts and challenges when implementing policies and priorities surrounding climate change. Trustees who pursue addressing climate change will often prioritize meeting with their managers on a recurring basis to ask questions related to climate risk specifically. So, for example, what are the highest emitting assets in our portfolio, or which assets in our portfolio might be at risk of the physical impacts of climate change? And then going further from there, what are they doing to mitigate those risks? Trustees can ask for concrete and real-life examples of where and how investment principles and policies surrounding climate were actually upheld in the portfolio. It shouldn't just be a box-ticking exercise. It's really the idea of kicking the tires to verify practice and implementation. This is ideally done in a meeting where there can be a dialogue between the trustees and the managers to break out of that dynamic where an investment manager is just presenting to an investment committee. This does, however, require that trustees have access to relevant and up-to-date information from their managers, like proxy voting guidelines and general investment policies. There are several tools that investors might use to help facilitate these kinds of conversations. Zai mentioned the university questionnaire. I wanted to break down a couple other examples. So this is an oversight tool that we helped the Atkinson Foundation develop to get to the bottom of how their managers were performing, not solely on high-level ESG issues, but on issues that were important and relevant to the mission of the foundation. The results from the questionnaire revealed that one of their managers may not have been fully meeting their expectations. So in order to investigate further with SHARE's support, the foundation is now conducting an audit of their proxy voting records. So we've talked about proxy voting a couple times today. Again, proxy voting is a really useful tool to influence corporate issues during AGMs of portfolio companies, including and sometimes especially related to climate change. Companies follow the results of these votes really closely because they provide direct shareholder feedback. And shareholder resolutions with strong votes, particularly votes that have an increased year over year in support, can actually spur companies to undertake the changes that were outlined in that proposal or negotiate an acceptable compromise with the shareholders that filed that resolution. Last year, there were actually some significant wins in the proxy voting world related to climate change. 2 shareholder proposals related to setting greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, one at Jack in the Box and one at Wingstop, both received over 50% support, which ended up pushing both those companies to set some targets. And Share filed a proposal at Dollarama, which ended up moving the company to adopt clear climate targets. For small and medium-sized investors, proxy voting responsibilities are usually delegated to their investment managers, so conducting an audit on a semi-regular basis of how your managers are administering your proxy votes. It's a really good way to get a better sense as to whether or not your managers are voting your proxies in alignment with your expressed beliefs and values. Some investors will actually even develop their own proxy voting guidelines that they'll then use to benchmark their manager's performance against. Another really useful mechanism for taking action on climate, for small and medium-sized investors especially, is collaboration. When investors pool their resources together, they can find strength in numbers and work together to establish collective expectations for investment managers and portfolio companies surrounding climate. Collaborative shareholder engagement enables investors to use their voice as shareholders to support better corporate sustainability policies and practices, and shareholder engagement on climate has proven to show some serious results. For example, after facilitating conversations with leadership at Metro related to their greenhouse gas reduction targets, Share filed a proposal which pushed the CEO to announce new improved 2030 emissions reductions targets. And the difference between the old and the new targets is equivalent to taking 144,000 cars off the road. The Values in Action program, which many of you might have heard of, is another great example of a shareholder engagement program that's addressing issues specifically on behalf of Indigenous investors. And VIA has actually made leveraging corporate action aligned to climate science an engagement priority for 2025. The voice of investors is now more important than ever. Investors are uniquely positioned to address the climate crisis in a meaningful way through investment policies and active engagement with both their managers and portfolio companies. Today, the world feels more polarized and divided than ever before, so it is our imperative, now more than ever, to come together and start having meaningful conversations and asking some serious questions. What are our investment beliefs, and do they align with our community's values? What are our investment managers doing, and what kind of oversight do we have over them? What companies in our portfolio are high emitters or might be facing climate-related risks? And who are our allies? And how can we leverage our relationships to address these risks and opportunities collectively? That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.